Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Now, just before we welcome our first guest to the programme, we mentioned on the Sunday View programme on Sunday last that over 250 alleged breaches of humanitarian law by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen is being investigated. Now, this was announced by the UK Defence Secretary Michael Fallon over the weekend. He said over 250 alleged breaches of humanitarian law by the Saudi-led coalition are being investigated. The government has faced repeated calls to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia after repeated and serious breaches of alleged human rights abuses. However, the UK has continued to allow sales with more than £3.3 billion of arms licensed since the bombing campaign began in March 2015. Can you believe it? We're approaching 2 years of what's happening in Yemen. And somebody mentioned on Twitter today, when I announced that Marwa was coming back on the programme, somebody said on Twitter today, you just don't hear anything about Yemen on mainstream media anymore. Well, over the weekend, the BBC did run, and ITV ran with that story about those abuses, alleged abuses by the Saudi-led coalition. Our first guest today has been on the show before. You know her very well. She is a journalist and a terrific political analyst. You often see her on TV news, most often on RT, giving an insight into what's going on in Yemen and in Syria. Let's welcome back to the programme live from Beirut, our friend Marwa Osman. Marwa, welcome back. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Richie, for having me on. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming back. I really appreciate it. What did you make of the UK Defence Secretary saying that they're looking into over 250 breaches of humanitarian law by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen? What did you make of that?
Well, I think that these people should just stand in front of a mirror before they start talking about breaches by Saudi Arabia. They should look on how they have been selling arms and they've been condoning the acts of Al Saud since 2 years now. This is horrific. The fact that Theresa May just stood and said, we will help Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia is our ally, that's a big statement saying that we don't care what's going on in Yemen. We don't care how many bombs are going to fall on the heads of baby Yemenis. And we don't care whether or not Saudi Arabia is committing genocide or not against the people of Yemen. And now saying that they have to look into, quote unquote, the breaches of Al Saud. I don't know how the British public actually just accepts this kind of statements coming from their own government, knowingly that their tax money is going into the destruction. The entire infrastructure of Yemen is now destroyed. The heritage of Yemen is destroyed. And most importantly, the people of Yemen, more than 17,000 lives have been lost for the past 2 years, and no one seems to care. I have no idea if people are humans anymore, or if they actually think that Yemen is on the map or not anymore. But the fact that people buried their children and then someone else buried those people again just 2 weeks later, that should be some sort of an earthquake that should just tremble humans into awakening, and still nothing's happening.
You know, the only time I remember a senior British politician being asked a serious question was about 18 months ago. Jon Snow of Channel 4 News did repeatedly asked David Cameron how could he support a regime like the regime in Riyadh. How could you support that? Repeatedly. The problem is, Marwa, we're lucky if once every 2 or 3 years a presenter has the courage to really hold a politician, stick them against the wall, as we say, and ask them these questions. We just don't see it. And while there are people like me and others who follow these issues closely and understand it, the average British man and woman, many of them probably more intelligent than I, but because of where they get their news, they don't have any idea what's going on in Yemen. No idea.
But, I mean, the least that they could do is just ask. If they have no idea, we are living the age of social media. And I don't think that social media, I don't even want to go and talk about the alternative media, quote unquote. I want to talk about social media point.
Yeah.
You have within your hands a small mobile phone. Everyone has it. A small smartphone that you literally have the world within your hands, and you still would rather search for the blockbuster movies, or who won the Oscars, or what kind of song is breaking the albums this day or this week, than actually talking about the real things that matter in the lives of your nation and the nations that are being affected by the decisions made by your government. We all know that the governments that are ruling the entire planet are the US, the UK, and a couple of Europeans. But the fact that we still have no idea, or choose to have no idea, of what is actually going on in the lives of the people affected by the decisions of our governments is beyond, I don't want to be tough, but it's beyond hypocritical. I mean, we could talk for hours and debate about how important planting trees is, or saving the animal wildlife is, or et cetera, from the debates that go on throughout the more developed world, if you will, the first world, and then look at the other part of the planet and watch it literally dying. You have not only humans dying because of bombs, but humans dying because of malnutrition, because of blockades, because of simple things that can be stopped with a simple decision. I'm not only talking about the sales of arms or the bombs that are shelled against the people of Yemen, because some people would say, well, no, this is not a war, it's actually a conflict, it's a civil war. Well, we can debate this till the morning, but let us talk more about the blockades, about the malnutrition, about the actual decision to stop simple flour to make bread from entering Yemen. But let's talk about the bombing of water factories that actually make mineral water, because you cannot drink any kind of water in Yemen, or else you will have cholera. I mean, simple stuff like these. Let us talk about how Al Saud are actually blockading the entrance of medical supplies into Yemen. Medical supplies. Not only oil is not getting there for people with dialysis and doing other major surgeries that are dying right there in the hospital. Simple medical supplies. Children are dying because of diarrhea, for God's sake. 1,000 kids per week. Do we hear about this? Do we talk about this?
And as you're talking about that, I'm reminded of a story on the BBC today that the Red Cross are saying that basically they're not able to get to areas, and this is to completely back up what you just said there, to get aid to people because of the blockade by the Saudis.
Even,
and I want to mention...
go and read about the reports of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. If you read their reports, you would just stand there and feel horrified.
And I got to mention as well, I didn't mention at the top of the segment, I should have done, British Aerospace Systems announced on Thursday, because of their sale of arms to Saudi Arabia, their profits have risen over 13% to £1.9 billion. And you talk about conscience, and you wonder the hundreds and hundreds of men and women who go to work for BAE every day, did they have any idea what those weapons are being used to do? It's a staggering thing to me. It really is. I don't know what to say about it.
Well, the thing is, it's Washington and London are just playing some sort of a game of selling who sells more arms to Saudi Arabia by encouraging the Arab countries, especially the Muslim Arab countries, which they banned them from entering their own states. It's just ridiculous. They encourage them to kill each other, and then they provide them with even more weaponry, and then they make some sort of a cells that similar to Al Qaeda, which, by the way, congratulations, they just received their Oscars. Wow. So they encourage the founding of such groups, such extreme groups with an ideology coming from Saudi Arabia, and then with arms coming from these two states, with the political cover needed in the international community and even in the United Nations. Sadly, the United Nations is nothing but a puppet in the hands of the West. With the political cover from the United Nations, and that's it. And wages and wars are just waged. For example, the U.S. is still bombing ever since Obama was president, and up till now, they're still bombing 7 countries without even taking a resolution from the UN, or even a legitimacy. I'm not going to give a legitimacy for the Congress as well, but even without the approval of the Congress, they are still doing so. and you still have Americans fighting over whether or not people should go to the same bathroom or not, and not
right.
actually talking about the 72 bombs per day. That was the average, is 72 bombs per day falling on the heads of the poorest.
Under Obama, yeah. It was over 20,000. It was more than 25,000 bombs
per year
last year.
Yeah,
that's right.
An average of a 72 per day. Yes.
I want to talk about the white helmets, and I want to talk about in a minute the extraordinary. I learned an extraordinary thing. I was talking about this yesterday, and I mentioned that the producer of the Netflix documentary, Joanna Natasagara, I was talking about her being from Manchester. I learned today. And you learn something new every day. You know, you might think you have your fingers on the pulse, but a lot of things happen and you can't know everything. I learned that she never visited Syria. Now, if that's true, that's staggering. We'll come to that in a minute.
Why should she? I mean, let me tell you something.
Imagine producing a documentary and not being there.
Don't be appalled by her not being into Syria, but be appalled by the fact that the white helmets actually are in Izmir, southern Turkey. They're not even inside of Syria.
We'll come back to that in a second. If you're just tuning in, Marwa Osman is on the line to us live from Beirut. We've a lot of time for Marwa and her objective, it must be said, reporting of these issues since we got to know her last year. So when Donald Trump was elected, a lot of people, particularly in the independent media, said this was good. However obnoxious the man might appear to be, it's a good thing because he's going to roll back on interventionism. Now, Marwa, he announced that he's going to put another $55 billion into the US military. He also backtracked on a promise that he made when he was campaigning, the promise being that, you know, he would pull away from NATO as well. He's basically now doubled down and said that, well, you know, we're going to take a full part in NATO in the future. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, what do you imagine people in positions of power, the press, whatever's left of it in Yemen and places like that, what do you think they have made of what's happened with Donald Trump since he became elected?
Well, I have to say that it doesn't really do any change, or it doesn't really affect their position, because at the same time they know that whatever administration that is going to come into Washington or into the White House, they're not going to radically change their policies toward the Middle East. We do understand that, whether here in Lebanon or in Palestine or in Yemen or in Bahrain or in Libya or definitely in Syria. But the thing that they understand is the fact that every president, by now we understand how the system works in the U.S. When every politician comes to power, and every president takes office, they make a lot of promises for the people to actually vote. And after the vote, they have to abide by the rules of the system. And the rules of the system that are put by the elite of the world, not only the elite of the U.S., the elite of the world that control the global system of the world, from banking to military to movies to taxation, everything. These elite who have the power to change nations and change regimes, they find that the only language that they understand is profit. And profit comes through war. That's why we always say, in activism, we say stop wars for profit, because there's no war ever created unless it is for profit. So we in Yemen or in Lebanon or across the Middle East or across other nations that are being affected and inflicted by the wars made by imperialism or Western hegemony on the regions for resources, for the aim of stealing the resources, we understand that there is really nothing that we can do to change the political mind or the political system in the U.S. Unless one major shift happens in the world, and that is a shift against capitalism, a shift against imperialism. So we are absolutely sure that whether it was Trump or someone else, war is going to remain the basic, if you will, I'm not going to say like the basic movie of our life or the basic essence of our life, but we know we are not going to go into full peace mode unless the entire global system actually changes.
Do you know what, Marwa? There was an article on CNN last year on their Money website, and I was reading it again today. I did mention it last year when it came out. It was given very little coverage, but CNN's own economic journalists, put out an article last year entitled, here's the title of the article, Here's a guessing game. Here's a guessing game with scary implications. How much of America does Saudi Arabia own? And in the article, they pointed out that the Saudi Central Bank is sitting on an incredible $584 billion of foreign currency reserves. Wait for it, Marwa, wait for it. The US Treasury Department refused a Freedom of Information Act request to say how much of that 584 billion is US Treasuries, is parked in US Treasuries. A conservative guess would be that the Saudis own somewhere between 15 and 20% of the American economy. So that's why one of the world's greatest ever violators of human rights abuses, just gets away with it, can do whatever it wants.
Well, look, I can debate that is only an illusion. And despite the fact that they might own 20 or let's say 30% of the economy in the U.S., it is actually in the hands of the U.S. who controls this money or these assets. I mean, it's up to the U.S. elite, it's up to the system within the U.S. to actually give approval or disapproval to whether the Saudis own or disown this or that much of the economy. If you look at what's going on right now, in 2 years, the Saudi monarchy has managed to put itself in deficit. Through the budget. If you read more about what's going on within the Saudi economy itself, you would understand what I'm saying. I'll give you an example. For example, the salaries of the employees who are working in public sectors and within the government institutions have decreased. Their bonuses have stopped. More than 24,000 immigrants have been deported. The Saudi monarchy said that they were deported because of terrorism. And under the pretext of fighting terrorism, that's not true, because for the past 20 months there had been unreported demonstrations on the streets. People have been put in detention centers because of demonstrations, because they haven't had their salaries paid. And most of them were immigrants. 24,000 immigrants were deported because of that reason. They are not being able to pay for them. Another thing is the fact that they even changed the monthly calendar of payments, which means there's nothing called the Christian calendar, the calendar that we know within Saudi Arabia. They don't have January, February, or let's say we are in the year 2017. They don't have this. They have something called the Islamic calendar. They even changed the name of that calendar. They changed it into something called the horoscopic calendar for them to be able to run away or to dodge certain loans and to dodge. It was something very silly, but it is how the constitution works there, if there is a constitution actually. But the thing is, they even changed the calendar in the governmental institutions in order to dodge loans and to dodge payments. This is how much the Yemeni war has cost Al Saud by now. But if you talk about how much they own within the U.S., trust me, by the time Al Saud would start screaming that they don't have any money and please, the U.S. give us back liquidate some of our assets, trust me, the U.S. will say you have nothing with us.
No, of course, no, but it is more complicated than that when it comes to finance, because threats could be made to pull money out of certain sectors that would cause chaos for jobs and for the U.S. economy. I understand exactly what you're saying. But it does go some way, maybe not as much as I think, but a small way to explaining why there's little or no appetite to take them on.
Well, it might, but at a certain time, we all know how easy it is for the U.S. administration to fabricate. They might be facts that they might have been put, that they put inside of a certain box. Let's call this box the black box. They use this black box when they need to. They might have certain facts against the government of Saudi Arabia. It could be as simply as violations of human rights, that they could use this card and say, well, these are no longer our friends. A regime change is needed and a color revolution will happen. Anything. The U.S. is capable of anything because they have the tools and they have the connections to do so. So at a time when they only feel that Saudi Arabia would be some sort of a risk for their system, they were just ended like that.
I want to talk about the very political decision made by the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences over the weekend to award Best Documentary to the White Helmets. I just want to very quickly remind our listeners that the White Helmets organisation, Marwa was on the programme last year talking about them. We've also had other journalists on the programme talking about them, where they came from, how they are funded by groups in the US and in the UK, groups with ties to Soros and others. But they are and always have actively campaigned for two things. One, the imposition of a no-fly zone on Syria, number one. But number two, of course, the creation of safe zones, which we've always said we believe is another way of saying let's partition the country. That's what this is. It seems to me, Marwa, that's what this is all about. It's drawing attention to these people and their call for a no-fly zone, which I believe historically would mean, a lot of US and so-called coalition troops on the ground in Syria. What do you make of what's happened in the last few days?
Okay, let's talk a bit about the White Helmets and then talk more about what's going on, especially in the Al-Bab area, which is the area, a territorial area between the borderline of Turkey and Syria on the northeastern part of Syria. Let us talk first about the White Helmets. The White Helmets, they are just simply they are Al-Qaeda. They are a group that have nothing to do whatsoever with civil defense, as they claim, or as the documentary actually claims, and they have everything to do with supporting terrorism against the sovereign independency of the Syrian Arab Republic. And look, the thing is that when we say that they are Al-Qaeda, what we mean is they are Al-Nusra. There's nothing literally called Al-Qaeda in Syria, but they have different names. It's Al-Nusra, it's Jabhat Fath al-Sham, it's all these names. But basically Al-Nusra, and they resided in Aleppo. And when you look at what happened in Aleppo after the liberation, and you see that more than I think it's more than 10,000 plus people were evacuated from the city after the liberation, you could ask, well, where are the White Helmets? The first thing that happened, and thanks to the efforts of our friend Vanessa Beeley, who went to Aleppo at the moment of liberation, and she spoke with the people there, and she simply just asked them, where are the White Helmets? And the answer was, what are the White Helmets? What are you talking about? And she tried to explain to them, it's the people who wear these white helmets on their heads, and they work and they claim to be the civil defense of Syria in the areas that are not held by the government. And the reaction of the people was simply that the people that were wearing these helmets in these areas were only helping the terrorists, aka they were only helping al-Nusra. They never ever helped any civilian, not even a vaccination to a kid. Up to that point, one of the women who were talking, and it's there. You can find it on Vanessa Beeley's page on all social media. She has it translated also into English. When the woman shows us her hand, where a bullet had struck her hand, and she didn't even have it removed because they refused to help her. And then you see what happened after the liberation, and they no longer exist in the area. And then we ask, well, where did these people who claim to be White Helmets go? And guess where did they go? They went inside the green buses and went to Idlib. That's where they went. So basically, what the White Helmets are, they are the terrorists who, and by the way, you could also see them with flags of ISIS, Daesh flags, and you also can see them in other videos holding guns and killing people, each individual, in one picture wearing the helmet, in the other picture having the gun in his hand, killing someone else. We are not just talking and provoking Hollywood as we are being now accused of. No, we have been talking about this for the past 2 years, but seemingly now the world has heard of them because of the Oscars and because of this
and the
documentary.
Netflix film. Yeah, I mean the only news organisation to talk about them was RT. None of the networks in the UK or the US did anything on them. If it is true that the producer and the director of the film didn't actually go there, but yet were handed raw footage from the region, and everything Marwa said there is right, by the way. These so-called first responders were operating in so-called rebel-held areas, which were ISIS-held areas. There's no way that these people were an independent group of do-gooders.
The thing is that nonsense. I fail to understand is why do people don't ask questions? Let us say that they are really the first responders. Can't we ask how did they manage to get the equipment that they have, or how do they manage to get the funding? When Boris Johnson himself went and visited them in Izmir, in the camp of Izmir, supposedly the camp that trains them, and he openly said that the UK is giving them 60 million pounds
That's
in
right.
aid. That's $65 million in aid. 65 million. I mean, do you really? People
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question now.
Yes,
When I hear the frustration every time you and I talk, as eloquent as you are, I hear the absolute anger and the frustration. Let me ask you this. How much time have you spent in a country like the UK or Ireland or the United States, if any?
Well, the last time I was in the UK, it was my first time. It was in July, and I spent 5 days.
And that's your pretty much only experience of being over here. I'll tell you why. Because you're asking a fantastic question. You're asking about why do people not care about this? Why don't they investigate? Why don't they ask questions? I've spent some time, not much time, but I've spent a little time in places like Morocco, in South Morocco now. I'm not talking about Tangiers, going into the heartland, Fez and beyond. I've spent time in parts of the Middle East travelling, but not much. You know what I find, Marwa? The people are much better where you come from than they are here. People in your part of the world still care about one another. Now, I'm not comparing Lebanon with Morocco. They're two different countries. But the general feeling amongst people is to look out for people, to love people, to listen to people, to try to understand people. I live in the most selfish society on planet Earth. We have a narcissistic me society. We don't ask questions about anything. We're spoon-fed what to think by Sky News, the BBC and Channel 4. We're numbed down with some of the worst television programmes ever made and everything else. That is the reality of what's happening here. And you would have gotten a small taste of that last July when you were in the UK. That's the reason. We're not like you, Marwa. We no longer care about one another.
I have a theory, though.
Yeah.
It's a bit brutal, and I'm sorry, but I have to say this. But I think that the fact that you guys have not seen real blood and real war.
Never seen it, no.
I think last time that the UK had war was it ended in 1945. That was the end of it.
That's right, on the mainland. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
The thing is, I think the devastation and agony come from pain and suffering, and sometimes I'm not saying that pain and suffering are important or are needed, but I think that when there is pain and there's suffering, and when you see actual people die in front of you, and when your life flashes across, when you are in the middle of an explosion, I think this gives you another perspective of things, and this brings you back to the essence of being a human. I'm not sure that this should be something good, but at least we should look for something good in everything that happens. And it seems that everything that happens in my region is filled with agony and with destruction. So I'm sorry to say that, but it's
no, you're right. Look, I've interviewed over the years maybe 2 or 3 dozen former soldiers who were Iraq War I veterans or the Second Iraq War veterans, and I've never met anybody who wasn't deeply disturbed by some of the things they saw, and had a completely different perspective on, God and country, and a totally different perspective on patriotism. Every soldier I ever met, Marwa, came back and basically either got very ill and disappeared and fell on hard times, or they began to take part in activism against their own government. I absolutely agree with you. If people could experience and feel where you come from, it's been ravaged by wars which have been started by the US and the UK and Israel and other parties. If we could just get, just for a minute, the feeling of loss and devastation, then maybe it would change people's minds.
The thing is, I always get asked, why do I hold so much anger within me, especially when I am on a talk show, or especially when I'm debating someone. I would be asked, why don't you calm down a bit? Why are you angry? Well, the thing is that if people would understand that I am a 29-year-old woman living in a country that has never seen peace, and the last time that it's different between me being a single woman and then me being a mother. The last explosion that happened, 2015, it was a twin explosion in my region, just 5 minutes away from my house, and I was getting my children back home because I was coming home from work. And I had a 5-month-old baby in the back seat, in the car seat, and her sister, my daughter, 3 years old. So it's 3 years and 5 months, 2 kids in the back seat, and explosion happens. And me, because being in the radius of that explosion, I couldn't even hear it. But I just saw people running, and I felt the wave of it. And then people would ask me why I'm angry. Are you serious? How should I feel when at any moment I could lose my children? I am ready to die any moment, but I'm never ever going to be ready to lose my children at any moment for any reason. And if at any time that happens, by God, I will become a ticking time bomb.
I can't say anything to that. That's extraordinarily powerful, Marwa. I mean that. I can't add anything to that. I just want to ask you one question before we run out of time today.
Yeah.
Trump is just another establishment stooge. He wouldn't be there if he wasn't. And there's no doubt about that. However, the anger that led to people turning against Hillary Clinton, now people didn't understand what Trump was, but anyway, anything but the establishment. So they voted for who they thought was anti-establishment, even if he isn't. Is there something positive to be taken out of that? With the UK decision to leave the European Union, to get away from decentralisation of power and a European army and all of that, is there reason to be optimistic that there might be a groundswell coming of people who are sick to death of our countries causing death and destruction and murder in countries like yours, in Syria and Lebanon, Syria, Libya and elsewhere? Do you think that, misguided though it was, the vote for Trump, the primal scream from ordinary Americans might be a good thing?
Well, not really. First of all, don't apologize. It's coming. Lebanon has its own part of the cake, part of the pie, and it's coming. Trust me, it's coming sooner rather than later, because of the last meeting between Netanyahu and Trump says it all. It's coming, and it's coming fast toward us. But about Syria and about the region, also, I'd like to open up the eyes of the audience or the listeners, that the fact that Syria now is at a crossroad, and what seems to be happening in Syria is going to be very dangerous. Please watch what's going on the borderline between Syria and Turkey, and watch what's going to happen in Raqqa. There will be a third world war, I swear to you. Just wait for it. The things that are going on, the people that are ready to go in, it is horrifying.
You believe, just before we go, Marwa, you believe that the Turks are going to invade Syria, right?
Oh, yes, and we will have American boots on the ground. We will have Iraqi
Russians.
boots on the ground. And unfortunately, what I just heard today, that there might also be Saudi boots on the ground. It's going to be horrific. It's going to be a double the size what happened in Iraq. But to finish off with Donald Trump, I think the only good thing that might come from Donald Trump being elected is the fact that the polarization in the United States is now at its extreme. It is at its extreme. We have a severely polarized, two-sided state. If that is the case in the U.S., then we might have a chance for them to actually get busy with their internal politics and just ease us with the foreign policy. But I'm not optimistic. I'm sorry.
Always good to chat with you, Marwa. Thanks so much for your thoughts on that. We'll be in touch with you again real soon. Good luck and continued success to you and your family. Thanks, Marwa. The terrific political analyst Marwa Osman on the line to us there from Beirut. You can catch Marwa pretty regularly on RT. Check out RT.com.